I'm Scott Al Miller. It's the 23rd of August, 2023. This is my vlog of daily life living in Leon, Nicaragua. Today, I'm going to be answering a viewer question about why does Managua seem to be such an empty city? We're going to get to that right after the bump. If you've come to Managua, as we've been in the last few days, you may get a feeling that a lot of the city is empty. There's a lot of open space, it's very low-lying, and a lot of buildings appear to be maybe empty. There's lots of homes, of course, that are in use, but there appears to be a lot of things available as well, and a viewer mentioned this, so I wanted to talk about it a little bit. And I think there's two really important factors that are going to be going on here, and I want to mention I'm near an air conditioner, and I don't know if you're going to be able to hear it or not. I'm going to do my best to clean that up. If not, I apologize. Hopefully we do get audio in this video. We've had lots of problems with that recently, but I'm recording in the garden, so hopefully we're able to control it a little bit. So I think there's a couple pieces to this. First, I want to say worldwide, this is absolutely a problem that cities are seeing, and that is that we had people working in offices nearly all the time back in 2019, early 2020, and by late 2020, early 2021, we had sent people home. And while many people have returned to offices, many people have not. And in the same vein, many people left cities around the same time because they wanted to live more out in the country, go to some place that was cheaper, have more space, whatever. But we had a large movement of people away from cities and a large movement of people away from offices. So around the world, we're having an issue where traditionally occupied office space is now unoccupied and city homes are being traded for country homes. There's also some real estate challenges around the world, but more or less, these are the driving factors. And so everywhere you go, if you're experiencing a new city, you are likely to experience places that have always had some amount of vacancy, but now are experiencing elevated amounts. New York City famously is in a crisis due to the amount of occupancy that they don't have. Here in Nicaragua, we are not isolated from this. The same things happened. Many people switched to working from home, and many people moved from the city into the country. So it's simply the same thing we're seeing everywhere else. Now, in Managua specifically, we have a slightly different mix of things. First of all, Managua is a low-lying city. There are very, very few buildings that are going to top 2 stories and almost none top 3. This is because of the 1972 earthquake that liquefied the city. They actually suffered from liquefaction and absolutely destroyed nearly all structures that were tall in the city. When they rebuilt, they smartly came back and simply built more low-lying. Nicaragua is a lot like Texas in that it does have a fair-sized population, but spread out over an immense amount of land. So Nicaragua is not hurting for space in which to put people, and Managua is no exception. The city is sprawling, and if you were to pack it in like a normal city, it could easily hold 4 to 5 million people, but it doesn't. It only has a population of about 1.3 million. So that leaves a lot of open space. There isn't a need for high-rises. They don't need to go up, they can go out, and going out is cheaper than going up. And at 1.3 million, they're not going out so far that people can't drive around from place to place. And people tend to have relatively small homes, so the distances remain even smaller because if it was the United States, people tend to have big yards, people tend to have big houses, so lots of space in between them. People want that, but in Nicaragua, that is culturally not how things work, and people spend a lot of time outside the house rather than inside the house. So they tend to have small houses for whatever reason, and so that leads to the situation where you're able to have a relatively sprawling, low-lying city, and you don't need to have high-rises. So this alone creates what we call the giant village effect, in that Managua feels as though you're walking through a large interconnected series of villages rather than going around a single city. Some places like the Carretera Messiah cut through the middle of the city and are so loaded with businesses that yes, that feels like a city thoroughfare going through the city, but getting very far off of that, you tend to get very isolated neighborhoods, colonias, comunidades, barrios, and so forth, and each one is relatively isolated, making it feel like this is your village. When you move to the next one, you're just moving to another village. village. It really lacks a lot of that big city feel that you would expect from neighboring cities of relatively similar size, such as Tegucigalpa up north in Honduras. Because of this, we have a feeling that the city is much less occupied than it actually is, simply because its population density isn't that crazy. In fact, the population density of the Departamento Managua is less than the population density of the Departamento Masaya just to its southeast, and similar to Esteli in the far north. So it isn't actually that densely populated throughout the entirety of the Departamento. Now, the Departamento goes quite a bit outside of the city itself. Masaya is a much smaller Departamento just around the city itself, so there's some reasons why it comes out that way, but Masaya is actually the highest population density in the country when measured at a Departamento level. So because of all these reasons, naturally Managua is going to feel like it's not that dense, and it's part of what we like about Managua. When you talk about the things that draw you into Managua as a large city that does have a lot of resources, lots of restaurants and stuff, it's because it has lots of green area. There's lots of ability to have standalone houses or yards, and just, it's very different. If you hate big city living, but you like big city resources, Managua actually delivers in a way that most cities do not. Personally, I prefer the denser city populations of San Jose or Tegucigalpa, where you do have high rises, you do have, top level floors with views out over the city, and that stuff's really cool. I like that style of living. You don't get that in Managua, but you do get this giant village feel that's pretty unique. It's the only city I know that gives the feeling just like it does. So I think it's very special, even though it's not something I would seek out most of the time. I do appreciate it and think that there are a lot of people who that becomes a really unique blend that may make a lot of sense for them. It also provides quite a bit of safety, believe it or not, in overall how Managua works. When you're in those safer barrios, you're in relatively isolated, safe villages, and it feels that way. When you're in dangerous ones, yes, you're in dangerous ones. It is still a big city. Don't just do what I do and walk around with a camera cutting through any barrio and not caring at all. That's foolish, right? I do that alone. I know I'm taking chances, but I'm doing that because I want to show you that even though I'm being foolish and taking chances, that I can do so with a pretty good degree of confidence. But I'm not recommending that you do that. But I'm also not recommending that you look at Managua with a sense of fear. I want you to look at it as a valuable city that is relatively safe with a lot to offer, and it's just a different blend of things than other cities, and so it should be in your list of considerations, but for most people, it's going to be rather low on that list. But for a few of you, it can be just perfect. But it's not all good news about Managua either. Managua is, just like the rest of Nicaragua, suffering from a high level of unemployment, meaning there are a lot of people who wish they were working but are unable to find jobs. Managua is the center of work for the country, so there tends to be more jobs there than other places, but there's also more people there because they're there looking for jobs. So there's more people unemployed while there's also more people employed. Because of the overall downturn in the employment in the economy, this is important to note. Nicaragua has gone through a major upheaval in its economic mannerisms, its modalities, because they were, up until the beginning of 2018, they were primarily focused from a government-promoted industrial strategy on tourism. They'd seen great success in Costa Rica and decided that they had the same resources and the same benefits that Costa Rica did and could leverage that as well, being such a close neighbor, and that was working really, really well and created a large number of low-paying jobs and kept a large percentage of the population employed even at very low rates. After 2018 and through COVID, there was a massive loss of tourism industry to the point where it essentially dropped to zero. This meant widespread economic collapse and a huge loss of employment across the country. Plus, many businesses simply went out of business. They didn't just stop employing people, the businesses vanished in a great number of cases. During that interim time, Nicaragua made a concerted effort to refocus its strategies away from tourism. They're in no way curtailing tourism. They're simply not putting the effort into it. They're not promoting it in the way that they did in the past. And instead, they're promoting more industrialized activities and meaning, not manufacturing, although that is also something you can do here. They're mostly promoting commercial activities such as call centers and technical services and other things that they're able to provide as a service industry to the outside world rather than as a tourism and hospitality industry. And then that creates more internal tourism. So the people who are traveling in the country now are mostly Nicaraguans Nicaraguans rather than foreigners. And we'll talk about some of that coming up in a future episode about the rising middle class here in Nicaragua, because it's very interesting and a major socioeconomic factor to keep in mind when you're trying to look through the Nicaraguan lens and understand what you're seeing. This is a lot of the cause of that. The shift from is because tourism typically pays minimum wage or extremely close to it. And we're familiar in the United States that many tourism jobs, of course, being like waiters, for example, because they're tip-based, are actually paid by the companies below minimum wage. Of course, tips can make it very much higher, but the actual pay rates can be minimum wage or less. Here you can't be less, which is way more sensible. Well, it's not even a minimum wage if someone can be paid less, but here in Nicaragua, and I understand that they have to make up for it if people don't tip. I know how the U.S. works. But here, the minimum wage is generally what's used in tourism industries. But when you're in call centers, for example, if you're in an English-speaking call center, it's common for those salaries to be 3 or 4 times that of the minimum wage. That's 300 to 400% of minimum wage. So the tourism industry, if you had 1 person working in a call center for every 4 people you had working in tourism previously, you'd have the same amount of money going into the economy to be spent on food, on housing, whatever. But it's isolated to a smaller percentage of the population. So in some ways, this is fantastic. It's creating this entirely new class of people who are able to earn a lot more and do more with their money, and they have excess to spend on things, but it also leaves a good majority of the population, or a good percentage of the population, I should say, without employment at all, and that is a terrible situation. So what you're seeing in Managua is this consolidation of jobs as many people leave things. So there's hotels that used to employ 40 people, maybe they now employ 10 people, and 5 of those people were able to speak English and they went and got a call center job and are making as much money as all the people who were laid off. But the income is consolidated to those very few people. Those other leftover people are often heading out to the country or other places where they may be able to work on a farm, or they're able to simply live with family and have lower expenses, because living in the countryside in Chinandega is far cheaper than living in the city in Managua. So those kinds of things are happening quite often as they shift the economy around. And because of that, Managua is also seeing a depopulation, partially of people leaving the city, but far more of people not going into offices. In some cases, it's just people working from home, so that's different. That is a shift in how they work. But in other cases, it is that there were more people working previously and fewer people working now, even though the overall economy is bigger. So you're seeing a lack of utilization of office spaces. And of course, as people prepare their houses to work from home, they don't need co-working spaces anymore. So we're seeing a potential decline in that kind of. We probably still are seeing an increase in that, but it's being cannibalized to some degree by people working from home as well. So yes, your observations of Managua are correct. There is a lot of stuff available, a lot of empty space, but it's for a lot of different reasons, and I don't think it's super unique to Managua. To some degree, Managua is facing some additional financial and economic factors that other places are not, but overall, I don't think it's as empty as it seems, and I think it's a very temporary situation. We're seeing the economy turn around in dramatic ways. We're seeing more jobs get created, and while there has currently been a large exodus of people from the country, especially over the last 2 years, I think that the propaganda that is driving people to leave when things are actually doing so well here is beginning to wear thin, and that more and more of the population is beginning to realize that they're being taken advantage of, and that there are not the incredible large number and automatic opportunities existing other places that don't actually already exist here, and many people are staying because the remaining opportunities are quite good. It's really a matter of education, that there's so much promotion that, oh, there's this grass is greener somewhere else, you should leave your country, go take a bunch of risks, gives a bunch of money to coyotes, leave your families behind and try to build a better life, when they don't realize that they're maybe jumping from the frying pan into the fire and leaving behind some of the best situations that people in those other places are learning to or wanting to get to themselves, and only don't do so because broadly they're unaware of them. So that bit of information is starting to permeate society, and the people who were looking for excuses to leave or easily gullible into jumping, or some have actually done well, those people have already left the country, and now you're getting more and more people who are interested in staying. And so we're seeing that population decrease, I think, slow to some degree, and the natural growth of the population will start to take over at some point, and then we'll see those cities start to fill in naturally. But simply through economic growth, because we've talked about this in some of our episodes about housing in Nicaragua. as the economy gets tighter, people move into multi-generational housing. It is a natural familial approach done in Nicaragua and in many parts of the world. In the United States, this is almost unthinkable, and people just won't do it no matter how harsh the situation is economically. But in Nicaragua, it is the standard, and so the idea that you would move in with your parents would move in with you, you keep your kids for longer, whatever, is normal. It is not oh, we've got to do this thing. My neighbor didn't have to do that. No. Everyone does it. It's expected. It's what you do. Your parents help raise your children. It is all part of the system. So because of that, their absorption of housing as part of the economic tightening or loosening is a normal relief valve to the economy. So as the economy begins to improve, which it is doing quite well, it takes time for these things to turn around. As the economy continues to improve and do so well, we are seeing more and more people move into independent housing and use more houses. Even though the population may not be actually growing, we're seeing that the 7 million people are starting to use more than 3 million houses, right? That's where it's different. In the United States, everybody has their own house, or every family has their own house. And here, very few do, and it's normally parents and grandparents and children all in one house. And so you may have a third the number of houses per person that you do in the U.S. But as they become more affluent, as the middle class gets bigger, the number of 20-somethings or 30-somethings who decide to go live in a house on their own, even before they have children, is starting to become bigger. That was almost unheard of just 10 years ago. It just was not a thing that you did. Even if you could financially do it, you wouldn't do it. But now it is starting to be something that you do all the time. And so it's not surprising to find people doing that. So I think you're going to find that the situation is actually pretty good in the long term, and that what you're seeing of Managua is a natural rubber banding effect as the economy shrinks and grows and people move to and from the office and so forth. And beyond that, simply reflecting the global situation of a lot of people not being in the office as much as they were just a few years ago. Thanks for joining me. If you have any comments, questions, whatever, get down there below. I'd love to hear from everyone. It's really great. All the conversations that we have on there. Like, subscribe, tell your friends about the show, and I will see all of you tomorrow.